Well, here I am in the Cairngorms and it's a cold, bright day. But what I have to talk to you about is heat and darkness. And in particular, I want to talk to you about solar power at my house in the darkest month of December. But I also want to talk to you about heating my house using my wood burning stove. Now, if you haven't watched my previous videos, hello, I'm Anthony. I own a 9 kilowatt solar panel array on my bungalow in Aberdeenshire. This solar panel array consists of 28 solar panels over 2 roof planes. Each solar panel is connected to a solar edge optimizer, and all of them are connected to an 8 kilowatt solar edge inverter. Also in the house, we've got 2 devices for managing surplus solar power. We've got a hot water controller which diverts surplus solar into my hot water tank. We also have a My Energy Zappy charger which is used for charging up my electric car. Now, December 2021 generated just over 76 kilowatt hours of electricity. And compared to December 2020, that generated 71 kilowatt hours of electricity. It demonstrates brighter weather, amongst other things. But within December, we found that some of the brightest days generated less electricity than the brightest days in December 2020. And I want to pass over to my doppelganger in the studio to talk to you about that in a bit more detail. Okay, so as we can see, we generated 76 kilowatt hours of electricity. And we consumed 64 kilowatt hours of electricity. That was about 14% of the overall electricity that we consumed. However, if you look at my electricity bill on the left, you'll see that the majority of our electricity consumed was on the cheap rate at night time. That is the electricity that we used for charging up the electric car. It's about £12 once you include VAT. And that gave us, at 280 watt hours per mile, that gave us 870 miles worth of driving for the princely sum of £12. I think that's impressive as it is. But if we look at the solar power production figures, 64 kilowatt hours is what we used. And of that, 23 kilowatt hours was used for hot water. So that means we used 41 kilowatt hours of electricity. And during our waking hours, we consumed 148 kilowatt hours of electricity. So according to my calculations, that's about 21% of our electricity consumed during the daytime on the expensive tariff was supplied by my solar panels. So it's a small contribution. It's smaller than last year. And the reason it's smaller than last year is simply because I was away from home a bit more this time round. I was away over Christmas and I was away over New Year. And the reason it's small overall is because I've got my electric car. I want to talk to you now about solar degradation. If we have a look at December 2020 and we look at the 22nd of December in particular, what you see here is 5.3 kilowatt hours of electricity being generated. Now this day there was no clouds whatsoever, and I remember that day very well. Now if we take the day closest to the shortest day of the year in 2021, this is the 17th of December. We generated a good amount of electricity there, but we generated less, 4.73 kilowatt hours. So the question is, why did we generate less even though we had no clouds whatsoever? And I touched upon this when I was cleaning my solar panels earlier on in December, and I speculated that it could either be down to the fact that the panels might be unclean, or it could be down to degradation of the panels, or it could be down to some extra growth. Well, I've got this app on my phone which plots the position of the sun for a particular time of the year. And it will show you what the position of the sun is on the 21st of December and the 21st of June, as well as today's date. And what we see is something very interesting. We see a tree getting in the way. And that tree looks to me like a cypress tree. And those grow pretty quickly. And it accounts for the what is just over 10% drop in solar power output. But as you can see, for today's date, that tree's not getting in the way anymore. So there's another reference point that we can look at. Let's look at the 6th of January 2021. And then we can compare it with the 7th of January 2022. So here you can see 1 day later, we've got some very comparable production figures. These are both reference sunny days. And when I say a reference sunny day, I mean a day that you can refer to later on. And that is typically one where there is no cloud whatsoever. So as you can see, 1 day later, 6.07 kilowatt hours. So what we can do is just see how much extra time there is. And as you can see, on the 6th of January, there is 7 hours and 1 minute of daylight. And we've got 7 hours and 3 minutes of daylight 1 day later. So you've got an extra 2 minutes. So 1 day later, we should get 0.06 extra kilowatt hours of electricity. So if we take 6.07 kilowatt hours for the 7th of January, subtract 0.06 kilowatt hours, then we get 6.01 kilowatt hours of electricity for the 6th of January when referenced against the previous year. So that looks like a 0.98% drop in solar power output when you consider all of these things together. So the degradation of the solar panels really can't be measured over just 1 year. And I'm pleased to see that this is the actual result. So we'll look at the month of 2022 in a bit more detail. So as I mentioned before, the brighter days were at the beginning of the month. Let's just see which one was the brightest day. So it was Friday the 10th of December. So this was 3 days before I cleaned my solar panels. We generated 5.33 kilowatt hours of electricity. So this is the worst day of the month. This is the 29th of December. 228 watt hours. So as you can see, even during the daytime, it really didn't make much of an impact at all. Yeah, two contrasting days for you. So I'm going to now hand back to my rather frozen doppelganger in the Cairngorms. Now I'm an automation systems engineer, and I follow that practice professionally into my personal life by automating many of my routine operations. However, I run a wood-burning stove, and a completely opposite mentality to automation applies to that process. And I want to illustrate what that process looks like in my house. So I have a system for bringing wood in. This is where I primarily keep my wood, and then I load it up onto a wheelbarrow and we bring it inside. So once inside my house, I've got these cupboards in my utility room, which I load up with that firewood. And that basically means I don't have to go outside quite so frequently. So at the moment, this is a new supply of wood. This is birch. I think it burns a lot quicker than my old wood. My old wood was softwood, probably pine. That burned for quite a long time. And with the old supply of wood, it was typically 10 days to 2 weeks between restocking. So I've got two cupboards underneath my worktop, which I just fill up with firewood. So I have these metal buckets, and they're very good. They don't allow any wood particles to fall through, so that's very satisfactory. Now, I've got two wood stores, and typically my consumption is between 1 to 1.5 wood stores per season. Just depends on the wood. I find hardwood burns very quickly, but it produces more heat. Softwood burns a lot more slowly. So I might be going back to softwood in the future. I tend to place an order for my wood in April. What I find is that although all the suppliers say that their wood is seasoned, my experience is that it still comes to me damp. So I want to have a good abundance of time to allow that wood to dry out. Now this wood was delivered in August because my regular supplier was unable to deliver. So here we are. Two cupboards full of wood. One. Two. So what I'm going to do now is split this wood into kindling. Okay, so that is the splitting done. So we'll just bring that inside. All right, so it's the evening time, so it's now time to load up the wood burning stove, get this thing going. So I use a method which I read about in Norwegian in a book called Norwegian Wood, which is a fantastic book all about collecting and burning wood. You start off with the biggest pieces at the bottom, and you have your progressively smaller pieces on the top. So I find in my shed, I take one of these pieces of wood and I split it into much smaller pieces. I don't use an axe. Axes, in my experience, can go horribly wrong. And I've also haven't got the best of backs for doing the good old axe swinging. Yes, I build it up from the bottom up. And the big advantage with this method is that if you had your kindling at the bottom, and your big pieces on the top, you'd have to start off with your kindling first, and then open your firebox to put your bigger things in. Doing it this way round, once I light it, in theory, I don't have to open this door again. But that all depends on the kindling. All this kindling here, it all comes from my garden. It's just harvested from the various bushes that I have in my garden. And I don't have to spend any money at all on getting bags of kindling for however much it costs. I can split down the logs as I see fit, and it's generally speaking, it's only wood I have to pay for. So that particular kindling goes up very, very nicely, but it leaves a complete mess, and I have to sweep up and collect it all before feeding it into my firebox. All right, so ready to light. So we'll just go here. There we go. This will go off very, very quickly. So why did I buy this wood burning stove? Well, I talked about the value of having a backup source of power during Storm Arwen. That's a very valid reason. There is another valid reason. It's cheaper to run and burn wood than it is to burn LPG. So that's the second reason. LPG is typically, it works out at around 7.5 pence per kilowatt hour. You compare that to mains gas. Mains gas at the beginning of last year, at least, it was about 3 pence per kilowatt hour. Now it's a lot more expensive. So we've got this perverse situation where mains gas per kilowatt hour is more expensive than LPG at the moment. I'm paying just under 43 pence a litre for my propane. So having an alternative means of heating my house just gives me arbitrage, so I can choose the cheapest method of heating. The third benefit is one that is touted a lot by the wood burning industry. They suggest it is carbon neutral, but I think a certain degree of comment needs to be added to that. We've got a climate change emergency, and they reckon we've only got 8 years left to prevent really damaging changes to our climate. Now, when you burn a piece of wood like this, you're releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The argument goes is that you grow a new tree in its place. Now, in the case of birch, which is what I've got here, the typical time from planting a sapling to harvesting it that I've read about, it's about 20 to 30 years. So in the context of a climate emergency, this doesn't really cut the mustard. There are other trees which grow up to 100, 150 years old or even longer. And if you chop those down, that's well over 100 years worth of carbon being released into the atmosphere. So I didn't buy this for carbon neutrality. There's also all sorts of discussions about local emissions. This is an efficient wood burner. So all the smoke that you have here gets recirculated in the firebox, and you end up with the smoke being ignited before being let out of the chimney. And what that means is that when you can look at the chimney when this is at high temperature, and you won't see any visible smoke coming out. You will when it's being fired up just now, and there was a lot of smoke when the kindling was just burned just there. But in normal operation, when it's up to 300 degrees, it's just fine. So This stove, once it's up to temperature, will keep half of my house nice and warm. And the other half of my house, my bedrooms, they tend to be quite cool. I prefer it that way. But they do get a little bit too chilly, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about next. So now that I've got my room nice and warm, I want to show you a few things. If we look at the ceiling, we get a temperature of 28 degrees Celsius. Now let's look at the floor, 23 degrees Celsius. So we've got a 5 degrees Celsius difference between the top of the room and the bottom. But I've also got a fan, and I bought this to stop the hot air at the top of the room settling, and as soon as I switch that on, you can just feel this really quite nice warm draft coming down. It's a major advantage and it's useful in the summertime when it gets a bit too hot. But if you have a wood burning stove, you always find that the hot air ends up there. But the other advantage of the fan is that it just redistributes the warm air to the rest of the house. So the feature of having a wood burning stove is that my central heating thermostat always stays above its switch on temperature in the evening time. And it means that I only need to use propane gas in the morning time after a cold overnight spell. But because this doesn't come on, it means that the temperature at the bottom of my house gets quite a bit colder. So here in my bedroom, we can see the temperature is only about 18 to 19 degrees Celsius. And that's fine, but overnight the temperature does tend to drop, and when it gets below 16 degrees, it does start to feel a bit chilly underneath the cupboard. So lately I bought something. So whilst the wood burning stove can't keep my bedroom warm, what we can do is use electrical heating at night time on the cheap Octopus Go tariff in order to warm up my room just a little bit. Now this is a dehumidifier. This is a brand called Miko, and this is a compressor based dehumidifier. Now the interesting thing about water vapor is that if you've got, say for example, wet clothes, when your clothes dry, that water vapor evaporates, and in order to evaporate, it needs to overcome the latent heat of vaporization. That heat comes from your room, and that drops the air temperature. Now, bedrooms and bathrooms are the two most humid rooms in a typical house. When you've got all of that water vapor in the air, that air will diffuse through the house, and it will go to an area where there is colder temperatures. And those colder temperatures are typically behind insulation. So when the water vapor finally condenses out, your latent heat is lost into a cold part of the building. Often it happens behind plasterboard walls, especially if there are no vapor barriers. Outside walls do have a vapor barrier behind the plasterboard here, but windows are a key place where water vapour is attracted, and that window is often on the cold side of a curtain. So when your latent heat is released, it's not useful anymore. And this is where this dehumidifier comes into play. This draws about 170 watts of electricity. But for every 170 watts of electricity, at a temperature of 20 degrees and a relative humidity of 60%, there's another 170 watts worth of latent heat being released back into the room through the condensation of water vapour back into liquid water. Now, I've already had a dehumidifier which I use for drying laundry, and I wanted a dehumidifier for my bedroom as well. The ABC range of dehumidifiers is one of the quietest in the range. You can also get desiccant based dehumidifiers. They're a lot more energy intensive. This uses 170 watts. A desiccant version of this would use about 300 to 600 watts of electricity for the same amount of water vapour extracted from the air. By combining the dehumidifier with the cheap overnight Octopus Go tariff, we can just get the edge off the cold temperatures in places like my bedroom. So I've used the Octopus Go tariff to shave a little bit of extra energy consumption off my propane gas boiler central heating duty. However, this in itself will not substitute propane gas completely. However, one person that you might want to look at is the EV Puzzle. He's got his own YouTube channel, and he's got an oil-fired central heating house in Norfolk. And he's running an experiment this winter time where he's trying to use the Octopus Go tariff to heat his house electrically instead of using the oil central heating boiler as much as possible. It's a really interesting channel, and he's got some quite interesting thoughts and insights onto the matter. But nonetheless, it strikes me that in order to substitute LPG, we really need to go to electrical heating. But electricity for the month of December on a wholesale basis has been around 20 pence per kilowatt hour. When you consider that historically the retail price is about 2.4 times the wholesale price, it goes to demonstrate that we really don't have a foundation of cheap electricity in order to electrify our heating for our houses in the United Kingdom. Some people think that hydrogen is a solution, but hydrogen, in particular green hydrogen, is a derivative of electricity, and it's an inefficient one. For every unit of electricity that you turn into hydrogen and then turn back into electricity, you only get 0.25 units of electricity coming back. That's not efficient. So my opinion is that investment over the next few years has to go into wind power and energy storage in order to get the price of electricity down. And it's only once we've got a cheap electricity price that we can start to entertain much more seriously the prospects of electrifying our heating for our houses and our offices. Anyway, it's a nice cold day today, and I'm going to be continuing to go up to the Cairngorms. What we have here in the background is Sker Gore, which is above Loch Eynick and above Glenfeshie. I think this is one of my favourite views on this short circuit of Carn Meg in the Cairngorms. But I'm going to be doing some more videos in the future. I've got one idea for a drive in my Tesla where I'm going to investigate all 4 points of the Scottish mainland compass. I think that'll be a good road trip to do. I'm not too sure when I'm going to do it though. But in the meantime, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'd like to talk to you again very soon.